Hello, and welcome to another lesson from Genesis in the series that we're calling the Patriarchs. We've already looked at three lessons discussing the incidents in the life of Abraham, and today we're going to be going to chapter 27 of Genesis to look at an incident in the life of Abraham's son Isaac and his two sons, Jacob and Esau. We left Abraham in the last lesson there in chapter 22, right after he has obediently gone out to Moriah to offer Isaac as the burnt offering. And of course, we know that during that particular lesson, we concluded that Isaac was probably about a teenager or maybe a young adult. To understand what's going on in chapter 27, we need to look at the details of the intervening chapters between 22 and 27, so that the passage in 27 will have better meaning. We know that in chapter 23, we're told of Sarah's death and Abraham's engaging with some of the neighboring tribes. In chapter 24, we're told that Abraham, who wants his son Isaac to not marry a Canaanite girl, sends his servant back to his people, Abraham's people, to get a family member and bring her to be the wife of Isaac. And of course, we're told the story of the servant going, finding Rebekah, and bringing her back to be Isaac's wife. Abraham dies at the age of 175, as recorded in chapter 25. And then chapter 25 goes on to tell us of the birth of of Jacob and Esau. Now, what we're told is initially after they get married, Rebekah does not conceive. Rebekah is childless. Isaac prays to God for a son to fulfill the promise because he knows of the promise. And God answers that prayer, but doesn't give him just one son, gives him two sons. That is, Rebekah conceives twins. While she is still carrying them in her womb, God speaks to her and gives her a prophecy about her sons. Genesis 25:23. Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Esau was born first. When he was born, he was described as being red and hairy, and thus he was given the name Esau, which translated means hairy. Jacob was born. When he was born grasping at the heel of Esau. And so he was given the name Jacob, which is translated to mean deceiver or trickster. That is, in that day and time, to say someone was grasping at the heel of someone is to say he was a trickster. He was deceiving him. We would use the terminology pulling your leg. But to grasp at the heel was considered to be, it wasn't a compliment. It was to suggest that this person is a deceiver or a trickster. And so he was given the name Jacob because that describes his birth, that is, grasping the heel of his brother. Also in chapter 25, we're told something about the boys as they grew up. Esau, we learn, becomes an outdoorsman. He loves to hunt. He loves to stay outdoors. Jacob, on the other hand, is an indoor. He's a homebody. He'd rather stay amongst the tents. Chapter 25 also gives us an indication that this family was dysfunctional. That is, it describes the situation between regarding the relationship between the parents and the boys. 25:28. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. When you have parents picking favorites amongst their sons, that can only result in problems. This was a dysfunctional family. The first incident of this dysfunctionality was Jacob getting Esau to sell his birthright for a bowl of stew, and we know that story. Esau was so hungry, he gave such little value to his birthright. He was willing to trade his birthright for something to eat, something he wanted. Chapter 26 tells us of Isaac's dealings with his neighbors during the time of a drought, and chapter 26 closes with the detail that at the age of 40, Esau married two girls from a neighboring Hittite tribe, and they were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Now, let's stop here for a moment and talk about a couple things culturally. First of all, let's talk about the significance of the firstborn male. The firstborn male in that day and time, whether it was the son or whether it was a firstborn animal in the flock, the firstborn male was thought to have special strength and special quality. In the family, it was understood that the firstborn male was going to succeed dad as the head of the family, the clan, or the tribe. And this culture put great emphasis on the unity of the family. So for the firstborn had a special role to play, a special quality, a special power. It was also understood in that day and time that the father lived on through his firstborn son. That is, his legacy would be carried out by his firstborn son. And it was said that if a man died without a son, that he was cut off from the living. His legacy was cut off from the living. The patriarchs understood that God's covenant was to be fulfilled through the firstborn. So being the firstborn son was a significant social status, a significant place in the culture of that day. Next, we need to look at the culture's attention to what's called the birthright. The birthright is associated with the disposition of property upon a man's death. Now, later, hundreds of years later, when the Mosaic Law is established, the birthright is given a very stated position. Let me read to you Deuteronomy 21:15 through 17. If a man has two wives, and he loves one but not the other, and both bear him sons, but the firstborn is the son of the wife he does not love, when he wills his property to his sons, he must not give the rights of the firstborn to the son of the wife he loves in preference to his actual firstborn, the son of the wife he does not love. He must acknowledge the son of his unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him a double share of all that he has. That son is the first sign of the father's strength. The right of the firstborn belongs to him. Very, very significant status given to the birthright of the firstborn. Even prior to this, though, even in Abraham's time, the firstborn was to have a birthright that was at least twice as much as the rest of the children would take. So when Esau sells his birthright in chapter 25, although this was a long time before the Mosaic Law, those readers after Moses wrote Genesis, those early readers understood there's something significant about him selling his birthright and basically diminishing his birthright to the point of something that was worth only a bowl of soup or a bowl of stew. Okay? Something of the dysfunctionality, the fact that Jacob would trick, or I don't guess you'd say trick, just take advantage of his brother who did not have the appropriate view of the rights that belonged to him. Dysfunctional family. Then we have the blessing, a third cultural feature. It was understood that this was the father giving the blessing to his children, to his child, and to the firstborn he would give a blessing. And once that blessing was given, they believed that the words being spoken released power, and that power and influence would determine the destiny of the recipient of that blessing. This power included the aspects of the son's future regarding his health, his prosperity, wisdom, descendants, and victory over his enemies. And it was also understood that once those words are spoken, they couldn't be taken back. The blessing could not be rescinded. The blessing couldn't be given to someone else. It's already been given to this one person. And this is the significance of the blessing. We begin chapter 7 then by hearing the conversation between Esau and Isaac. Chapter 27, verse 1. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." Here I am, Esau answered. Isaac said, I am now an old man, and I don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and your bow. Go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die. Okay? This is the plan. Isaac is going to give this special blessing to his oldest son Esau. He loves Esau more than he loves Jacob. Esau is the firstborn. Esau has already sold his birthright, but at least now he should get the blessing. We begin our lesson with verse 5 in chapter 27. 27, starting with verse 5. Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt for game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, Bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies. Now, Rebekah has heard the conversation between Isaac and Esau. We're not told that she was up to anything sinister here. It doesn't say she was eavesdropping. It doesn't say she wasn't supposed to be listening. It just says she overheard. Very likely she's doing work around the house and she just overhears it. We don't know the circumstances of it. Because she's involved in the plot to manipulate the situation as described later, gives us reason to want to think maybe this was sinister on her part, but that's not necessarily there. But we do know that she knows that Isaac was ready to give that special blessing to his firstborn Esau, the son that he loved. So she calls to Jacob, and she tells Jacob, this is what you do. Do what I tell you, and here's the plan. Now, we need to stop right here and talk about Rebekah. God had spoken to Rebekah and told her that the older son would serve the younger. Now, she's worried about the younger son not getting the blessing. She knows what God has promised, but that seems like it's not going to happen, so she needs to help make it happen, maybe. Maybe there's a little bit of this, God, I'm going to help you out here attitude. We don't know. She loved Jacob, though. She loved Jacob more than she loved Esau. And so she wants the son that she loves to get this blessing. So she tells him, here's what you do. She says, I want you to go and get 2 young goats. And she says, I'll take them and prepare them in a way that they'll be tasty food, counting on the fact that he would not, Isaac would not be able to tell the difference between wild game and the young goats. The young goats would be tender. The young goats maybe would be even more tender and tasty than the wild game if it was an older antelope or older animal that Esau might kill. But she knew her husband well enough that she knew how to prepare the food so that he would like it. And that was going to be her part in this. She was going to prepare the food so he would think he was eating what Esau brought in. Now, when she tells Jacob this is what she wants him to do, Jacob realizes we've got some issues here. Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, reading verse 11, But my brother Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing. He recognizes there's a problem with this plan. He says, even though his eyesight's poor, if he touches my hand, he touches my arm, he's going to realize that I'm not hairy, and then he's going to know that I'm not Esau. And if he knows I'm not Esau, that's going to be worse than not having the blessing. To be caught trying to trick him I'll be worse off. he said it'd be better to have no blessing, to take a chance and get caught, and then have Isaac against him. So he raises this question. Um, Now, notice though in this objection, Jacob did not oppose the plan. He didn't object to the principle on principle. He didn't say, "Oh, I don't think we ought to trick Dad." What he says is, "I think we're going to get caught." It wasn't so much the principle as the fear of getting caught. True to his name, Jacob, the deceiver. Rebekah tells him, "Just go and get the goats. Just go and get the goats." He went and got the goats as instructed. Let's read in verse 15. Verse 14. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which he had in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with goat skins. Then she handed her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she had made. He went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes, my son," he answered. "Who is it?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn." Let's stop right there. Here was Rebekah's plan. Not only was she going to prepare the food, now let's get the picture. Isaac is blind. He sent Esau out to get this tasty food. He's savoring a tasty stew. He sent Esau out to get it. He's anticipating that Esau will bring him this tasty stew. He doesn't know that anybody else is aware that he even asked for his stew. So now here comes someone in the room with the stew. And Isaac asked the question. Isaac, before he goes in the room, though, to make sure that that Isaac, being blind, doesn't, through his other senses, determine that this is not Esau, she does two things. First of all, she puts Esau's clothes on Isaac, his best clothes. Now, there are a couple things here. Number one, just in case Isaac could see even just a little bit, if he could see it all, if he saw the clothes, he would recognize that as being Esau. But secondly, as we're going to find later, those clothes would have a particular smell that would resemble Esau. You're going to say, what? People's clothes don't smell? Well, if you got somebody who's outside all the time, somebody who enjoys the outdoors all the time versus somebody that's inside. There was a distinctive smell, evidently, because we learn about that later. But she puts the clothes on him. Then the second thing she does is she covers his forearms and the back of his hand, as well as the smooth of his neck. She covers them with goat skins. She, again, is going to trick or deceive Isaac if he should reach out and touch the one bringing this tasty food. Now, again, Isaac is not aware that anybody else even knows that he has asked for this stew. Now here comes somebody in bringing the stew. And he says, when the voice said, "My father," Isaac responds, "Yes, my son," i.e., whoever calls you father must be your son. But then he says, "Who is it? Who is it?" And verse 19 is very, very significant. Verse 19, Jacob lies outright to his father. "I am Esau, your firstborn." Now it's interesting here in the Hebrew grammar, the translation doesn't come through, but we're told that in the Hebrew, normally when you said, "Who is it?" the answer would be Esau. But that isn't what Jacob said. Jacob said, "I am Esau," using that first person personal pronoun to emphasize, "I am." This was of special emphasis. "I am Esau, your firstborn." Lied twice. I'm Esau. I'm your firstborn. And then he says, I've done as you told me. Now, if Isaac is only aware that Esau knows of the statements that he made, now here's somebody that's bringing the stew, and he says, I've done what you told me to do. Then good reason for this blind man to assume that it's Esau. Um, and then Jacob gives his father some directions, politely, but he says, please sit up, eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing. He gives it, and these verbs are in the imperative. And the imperative tense suggests that they were given as a command. It's polite, but he's telling him exactly what to do. Sit up, eat, and then give me your blessing. Again, only the person to whom Isaac had spoken, Esau, would have known of this idea of a blessing following the eating, so he thought. So it all seems to be fitting together that Jacob would assume this was Esau. When he asks, who is it though? Jacob lies to his father. I am Esau. I am your firstborn. Sit up, rise up, sit and eat. Let's read verse 20. Isaac said to his son, how did you find it so quickly, my son? The game. How did you find this animal so quickly? The Lord your God gave me success, he replied. Now we're complicating the lie even more by invoking God's name on what we're doing. Well, God gave me success in finding animals. So Isaac is expressing some doubt still. Who is it? I'm Esau. I'm your firstborn. Eat, so you can give me the blessing. But he says, I don't understand how you found it so fast. Well, we've got another answer. God gave me success. Then Isaac said to Jacob, come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. Isaac is still not convinced that this is Esau, even though Jacob has lied, even though we've got the great deception. So he says, come over here and let me touch you so I can know whether you are my son Esau or not. Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He still wasn't sure. He said, the voice doesn't sound like Esau. But as he touched the back of the hands and he felt the goat skins, he was satisfied that this was Esau because of the hairy hands. He did not recognize, Isaac did not recognize Jacob, for Jacob's hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he proceeded to bless him. Are you really my son Esau? He's still not convinced. I am. Here's the lie again. I am, he replied. Then he said, my son, bring me some of your game to eat, so that I may give you the blessing. Jacob brought it to him, and he ate, and he brought him some wine, and he drank. Then his father said to him, come here, my son, and kiss me. So when he, Jacob, went to him, Isaac, and kissed him, Isaac, when Isaac caught smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said. So the clothes become important for the smell. And now having tricked him, having lied to him and deceived him and tricked him, he gives the blessing. And here's the blessing. We start down in verse 27, part B. He blessed him and said, the smell of my son is like the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. May God May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. Now, this blessing is basically like a poem. Hebrew poetry is marked by a distinctive feature that's called parallelism. And in parallelism, what you have is usually there's a statement that's made in one line. Then the same idea is repeated again in a second line, however, it'll be repeated in different words. Or a statement will be made in one line, and then there will be a vivid contrast drawn in the second line. Okay, let's look at this blessing that he gave. He caught smell. He now satisfied his Esau. He says, all the smell of my son is like the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. Now, that's not part of the blessing. That's acknowledging the smell. Based upon that idea of thinking about the fields and the outside, the blessing starts off with the blessings from nature. He says, may God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness. Heaven's dew, the moisture for your crops to succeed. Earth's richness, may your crops be productive. And then that same thought is repeated in the next line, an abundance of grain and new wine. In other words, smelling, thinking about the field, may God give you the abundance of the field. Then he moves from the abundance of the field, provisions in the field, he then moves to a military and political tone. He said, may nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Okay? Have victory over your enemies. Be Lord over your brothers, and the sons of your mother bow down to you. Even your family will serve you. And then the parallel is, those who curse you will be cursed, and those who you bless will be blessed. May you be victorious over your enemies. Okay, that's one thing. But then he says something that really causes some discussion, some difficulty here in understanding this. He says, may your brothers bow down to you. He only has one brother. That's Jacob. And then he says, may the sons of your mother bow down to you. There's only one other son. That's Jacob. But what has God told Rebekah before the boys were ever delivered? That the older would serve the younger. Okay? There is something here going on. And notice what's happening here. This blessing is going to be power that's going to determine the destiny. If, in fact, this blessing had been given to Esau, that would have been contrary to what God promised Rebekah. So throughout all of this, God's will is being worked because the older will serve the younger. Well, we're told that Jacob is barely out of the room. Let's go on to verse 30. After Isaac had finished blessing him, Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence. His brother came in from hunting. Brother Esau came in from hunting. He, too, prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. Then he said to him, my father, please, and same instructions, please sit up, eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing. His father Isaac asked him, who are you? I am your son, he answered, your firstborn Esau. Notice that he says, I am your firstborn. I am Esau. Jacob before said, I am Esau, your firstborn. Jacob had something to hide. Esau didn't. Isaac trembled violently and said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came in, and I blessed him. And indeed, he will be blessed. Translated, I can't take it back. When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me too, my father. The deception is now known. When Esau comes in, he says, here's the food. His father said, who are you? I'm the firstborn Esau. He says, well, somebody else just came in, gave me food. I gave him my blessing, and I can't take it back. And it's interesting to note here that it says regarding Isaac. Um, Isaac trembled violently, verse 33. The Hebrew verb here carries the understanding that the underlying cause of this trembling is either a great state of mental anguish or emotional distress, great anxiety. And Isaac is experiencing this great anxiety, realizing that he has now blessed Jacob, not Esau, the son that he loved. Esau cries out loudly, "Bless me too." The term, the phraseology, loud and bitter cry, in the Hebrew carries with it the emphasis that this is about as strong a cry as could be made. The strongest terms used to describe a cry are used here. Now, it's interesting. He's crying that he has not been the recipient of the blessing, but he doesn't think anything about having sold his birthright. It is more about him than it is his place in God's plan. Isaac's response in verses 35 and 36 is somewhat non-committal. Your brother deceived me and took your blessing. Look what happens here in verse 36. It says, 35, Isaac said, your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing. Just kind of matter of factly says, well, here's what happened. And then Esau responds, isn't he rightly named Jacob? He's appropriately named the deceiver. Look what he's done. He's deceived you. He's deceived me. This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. Well, the first time, Esau was easy to take advantage of. He was hungry and he didn't regard his birthright as worth having. Now he's been tricked, but he says it's the second time he's taken advantage of me. He took my birthright. That's pretty strong. And now he's taken my blessing. Then he asked, haven't you reserved any blessing for me? And Isaac answered Esau, I have made him lord over you, and have made all of his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son? I can't take it back. I've already given that blessing to Jacob. What is all this saying? Well, I said before, we've got a dysfunctional family here. We've got a family situation where things are not well. But it's interesting, there's a lot of deception, a lot of lying, a lot of turmoil going on. And we might be saying, well, where's God during all this? Why doesn't God intervene and straighten all this out? But the point we learn is God works through imperfect people to accomplish his plan. Like I said before, if Isaac had given that blessing to Esau, that would have been contrary to God's plan that he had shared with Rebekah. Now, this doesn't excuse Rebekah and Jacob. Rebekah, sensing that God's promise was to Jacob, wanted to help God. She wasn't ready to trust God. But through all of this deception and all of this personality, all of this self and me and my, God's still working out his plan. He works through imperfect people to accomplish his will. Now, that doesn't excuse these folks. It doesn't excuse them from the lack of integrity and the lack of trusting God. But God will accomplish his plan. And so when we don't see circumstances going the way we think they ought to, our temptation is to step in like Rebekah and make it work. We need to avoid that temptation. We need to learn from these folks that we need to live a life of integrity. But we also have to understand when we see other people that are not living that life, we need to hold on to the promise, to the lesson taught here. God will work his plan out even through imperfect people. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for this encouragement. And we, as imperfect people, put ourselves in your hand, trusting you to work through us to accomplish your perfect will. Father, help us through your Holy Spirit living within us. Enable us that we can live lives of integrity. But as we get caught up in these situations and we see people living ways that we don't understand, Father, help us to hold on to the promise that you will work your plan through all the circumstances, even through imperfect people. For it is our confidence in you that leads us to turn ourselves over into your hands, holding nothing back, and simply pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Amen. Thank you.